Good evening. You've turned into Ask Dr. Kat on Bella V TV, and I'm Dr. Catherine Williams. Tonight, we're talking about a subject that parents worldwide have been concerned about ever since its arrival a couple of decades ago, maybe a little bit more. Electronics, digital technologies, and now we have our Gen Alphas, kind of aptly nicknamed the Google kids, many of whom have used smartphones or iPads once they're able to hold them in their fingers. So with this widespread use, parents are asking now more than ever, is this problematic? How much is problematic? How do we avoid screen addiction or mitigate the effects? It's probably one of the most common questions I get from parents, not just those who are coming in to see me in clinical practice, but friends, peers, neighbors, friends who see me at cocktail parties before the pandemic, of course. So we're going to address these questions tonight on Ask Dr. Kat. We're going to have Jamison Wiggins, a clinical psychologist and co-founder of Intenta, a company that has built clinical trainings to address this very need, such as gaming disorders. We'll also hear from Dr. Nadir Weibel, a dad who has a background in computer science engineering and also a UCSD professor. And Dr. Weibel has spent quite some time researching into his best practices for his kids' screen time use. But first, let me introduce you to my lovely co-host, Amanda Caniglia, who happens to also be our Bella V TV producer and parent to Leo Caniglia, one of our esteemed kid panelists tonight. Amanda?
Thank you so much, Kat. It's been an exciting journey. I think we're in month 4 now of Bella V TV, and it's just been wonderful to have these episodes with Ask Dr. Kat. And today, as she said, I'm jumping from the role of producer and sometimes host to just co-host here and mother of Leo. So I'm an open book. I talk a lot about what's going on for all those parents out there that are struggling, especially single parents that are working or planning to go back to work during the pandemic. And how are we going to balance as our kids go back to school online? How are we going to balance them now being online all day at school, plus wanting that extra time for videos, for chatting with friends? So I think it's going to be just a great, really worthwhile episode today. So I'm going to jump right in and introduce our amazing panelists here. I've got a 10-year-old, 11-year-old, and 12-year-old, and this is Axel. Axel, can you say hello?
Hi.
Hey, Stud Muffin, welcome on the show. Axel, what do you do the most on the screen? Are you on social media? No, you're 10. What do you do on the screen? Do you play games?
I usually play games on my iPad and computer.
Okay.
Games I play most commonly are Minecraft and Roblox, and I usually play them with my friends and cousins.
Right on. Okay, we're going to get more from you soon, Axel. Leo, you're 11 and a half maybe? What are you doing all day up there, upstairs?
We're either playing my PS4 to my right, my Oculus VR, or gaming on my computer while talking to my friends.
What games that's all you're doing? You're not reading books up there?
Spoken like a true mom, Amanda.
No, you're not reading the Encyclopedia Britannica?
I either play it's called Terraria, Minecraft, Fortnite, Valorant. What else is there? I have Warframe, CSGO, Overwatch, and yeah, that's it.
Am I seeing this correctly? Do you have 2 screens behind you?
Yeah.
So you've got more screens than I do.
So dual monitor setup.
Wow, Leo, you're an expert. You're our kid expert on this. You've got 3 screens in your room.
My PS4.
4.
Yes, my VR head.
So Amanda, I think your son's just tattled on you.
Busted. All right, I think we need to move to Liana. Liana, our beautiful guest, 12 years old. Tell us, Liana.
Hi, I'm not really sure. I have social media I'm on that probably half of the time. I also have a TV in my room. Right before I was invited to go onto the show, I was actually doing that.
What kind of social media? Liana, what kind of social media? Like Snapchat or TikTok?
I'm on Instagram and Snapchat. I don't post TikToks, but I do watch a lot of them.
Like, what's a lot? How many TikToks a day?
I probably go through 5 For You pages a day. So that's like 500.
Okay.
I've gotten to the point where I had to install TikTok on my mom's phone because of how bored I've gotten.
How bored you've gotten, you said?
Yep.
All right. Well, Liana, Ask Dr. Cat is on TikTok, so now that's going to be part of your homework is you have to watch that first before you watch the other 499 videos.
Okay.
All right, tell your mom that.
Just go and follow
And
me.
mic drop.
Just go and follow me while you're at it.
What did you say, Leia? We couldn't hear you.
Just go follow me while you're watching Cat's TikToks.
So, Leia, you're on TikToks then. You're doing videos?
I have TikTok and Snapchat.
And Snapchat too? So Axel, you mentioned to us before we started the show, we talked a little bit about some of the talks you've had with your parents about screen time use. Have you had to negotiate how much time you're on screen times with them?
Yeah.
How does that
Sometimes
feel?
sometimes my screen time is really high and sometimes it's really low.
Okay. And what makes it high and what makes it low, Axel?
Usually my screen time is lower when I have a lot of other things to do, like back when there was school and it wasn't quarantine. But like as kind of slowly, now that like at there's a certain point with this quarantine, all this stuff, there's not much to do, and that makes me want to play more like video games.
So when you have a lot of things to do, you don't spend as much time on screen time because you're doing a bunch of other stuff. You know what we call that, clinical psychologists? We call that replacement behaviors. So if you want your kids, parents, perk up your ears. If you want your kids to spend a bit less time on screens, you engage them in replacement behaviors. And it sounds like Axel's school is a big one for you during the school year. And then what other things, even before the pandemic, what other things do you guys do, like on the weekends? Do you go hiking or to the beach? Oh, Axel, we can't hear you.
You're muted.
Yeah. And you can
go
just
to places we go to like places like Legoland, the zoo, Safari Park.
Wow.
Or sometimes I visit my friends and we play some games. Like sometimes the games get really ridiculous. I'm just gonna say that.
What do you mean by that, Axel? And Axel, you can just leave your mute on, or your unmute on. It's okay. What do you mean by that? It gets ridiculous. Do you mean like how long you spend on it, or?
I mean like things like playing games where we pretend we're tripping over lightsabers.
Okay, got it.
I mean that kind of stuff, basically.
Okay. And Liana, do you ever feel? I know that you must watch because you enjoy watching these videos and engaging in Snapchat. Do you ever sometimes feel like it's a bit too much for you?
I mean, sometimes. I've only done that once when I spent like all day. The only time I've ever thought about that was when I was sick. And when I'm sick, I usually spend all day in my room with my electronics. That was the one time I've ever feel like I was on this way too much.
And how did it feel? What did it feel like for you when you were on it way too much?
It made me feel like I wanted to go outside.
So that's the other strategy for parents is just make you watch so much that you're sick of it, right?
Yeah.
Leo, how about for you? Have you ever felt like it's just been too much?
Leo, unmute.
Not muted, Mom.
Okay.
Sometimes I feel like it's the opposite of too much because I want to see my friends more and play more with them. But I mean, sometimes I go to the park and play volleyball by myself
Mhm,
or
mhm.
ride around.
So it sounds like there are times, Leo, that you feel as if you're actually not getting enough. You need a fifth screen, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I know recently Leo and his cousin were camping, and I think they almost cut the trip short because they ran out of battery for their phones.
That
So,
was my question.
yeah.
It was like at 50 degrees, Mom. You weren't there. You wouldn't
Oh.
understand. You're like twig.
So Axel, I'm curious as to when you, because I know that one of the things that your parents told me is that sometimes they kind of cut you off from screen time use. So they say, you know what, you need to stop, for now. How do you feel when that happens? Oh, you're already on.
I feel bad because I don't want to do too much. It makes me feel bad when I do too much. Like, there was a point where I did like 6 hours a day. And I felt, and after that, I felt really bad.
Talk to your parents about that, Axel, when you felt really bad after. Oh, you're unmuted. See, this is a school thing. You're a very good student, I can tell, Axel, because at school you're supposed to turn it on and off. So you're ready for the fall.
So basically, it all comes. Whenever like I feel really bad, usually we sort of negotiate a screen time. Like say usually the average screen times we negotiate are 30 minutes, an hour, or 2 hours. Once 4 hours, but that didn't really work out.
So I'm hearing that there are definitely pros and cons, that like Leo, you really get something positive out of your screen time use and your gaming. If anything, sometimes you feel like you might not have enough. And Liana, you really enjoy watching these videos. And for the most part, except when that one day when you spent all day long, and then you just want to go outside. But for the most part, you really enjoy this. And it's something that helps you to feel connected with your friends. Is that right? I don't want to put words.
Yeah. Mostly my friends. I mean, sometimes random people pop up, but mostly them.
Okay.
Which
Tell us
brings up a good point, Kathy. So I think that's the struggle for parents is we want to limit their time on the devices, but at the same time, like Leo is saying, we feel guilty because, especially when you're an only child, you don't have siblings to play with, and they're in a pandemic. That's their lifeline to their friends. So we're kind of, as parents, put between a rock and a hard place because we're trying to limit, but then we don't want to cut them off from their friends, but we don't know the effects of what it's doing to them, brain-wise, developmental-wise. And then, as Liana just mentioned, you're assuming they're on with their friends, but as you said, sometimes people pop up that you don't know. Like that one right there. And actually,
that's a random person who just popped up. Liana, how about you? How do you handle those random people who pop up?
I mean, the only time I've ever had a person pop up is on a game where I'm supposed to meet random people. But I've been playing it with my friends. So when they pop up and they start playing around with us, we act really funny to the point where they think we're the old people. And they're like, bye. Then they just end up leaving. The only time I've ever actually had a random person pop up on my screen is something like that happening.
Oh, I love that, Liana. So you guys kind of reverse psychology them, it looks like. You got them to want to leave. Well, any last words? Thank you so much, kids, for coming on and giving your perspectives. We do have Dr. Jamison and, not Dr. Jamison, sorry, Dr. Nadir Weibel and Jamison Wiggins, who are coming on to talk a little bit more about this. We'll talk to you guys in a little bit. Does that sound good? After the show. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Liana, Leo, and Axel joining our kid panelists. Thank you so much, kids. And now we have Jamison and Nadir. Thanks for coming on. And what did you think about that, what the kids were saying? It was pretty interesting.
That was excellent. A really wonderful spectrum, and even having a bit of the family dynamic there as well is really useful to see, because that is it is very classic as to what we often see, and a family dynamic that is happening all over the place, even before the quarantine times, but especially now.
Spoken like a true clinical psychologist, Jamison.
Very PC, Jamison.
Not alone.
Thanks a lot for having me as well. This reminds me a lot of what I see at my home with my kids as well. So this is spot on.
It's interesting to me to start off with, the school's online this fall. And one of the things I noticed right away was the little spring, what I call crisis teaching or crisis learning during the spring, because, it wasn't exactly full online learning because everyone was just kind of thrown into it and there was no prep work. But I noticed that Axel there really got his mute and unmute down pat. I mean, he was like, it had been trained into him that that's what you do. So he'll be ready in the fall when school starts. Because I think all the kids, when you have 30 kids or 25 kids on the screen, you're supposed to do that.
And even when you mentioned not to do it, he would continue to do it because he is conditioned around it.
Right.
And it's so easy to condition some of those behaviors, especially at that age.
Yeah, it's developed into a habit. His 5th grade teacher will be very happy with that.
Right.
Jamison, do you have any strategies or tips for parents as they're preparing their kids? I know school reopening or online schooling is a big thing right now in parents' minds, and we're all trying to get our ducks in a row with making sure we have the right technologies, the right, last week we heard from teachers who told us make sure they have a space that's conducive to learning in their homes, that's dedicated for learning. Are there any other strategies that you would recommend, especially with regard to screen time use? Because a lot of parents are worried about Zoom fatigue and screen fatigue.
Right. So even before this, Common Sense Media, for example, every year they put out a study as to how much screen time in the U.S. Children are using. And last year, so before this, it was already, I think for teenagers, it was between 5 and 7 hours on top of any schoolwork. Right. So that was already what was happening. And now we're in an entirely new space. I think what the most helpful thing, I think, initially is perspective. So one is, we were probably going to end up in this place eventually anyway, right? So there's more and more, like Leo already has the VR headset, right? Like that's coming regardless, right? That's going to be in a lot of households. It's on the way. My approach as we do it in Intenta is very tech positive, right? It's like, this is a powerful, amazing technology that allows us to do school, right? To do these while remote. So having that perspective, I think, is very valuable. So that's one. Two is there's a bit of a shift actually in the way in which I think in the research and how we're starting to look at it, which it's not away from time, but it's definitely bringing in quality, right? So rather than how much time is happening in screen is what's going on inside of it. And there's even some new terms that are coming up for that. I haven't found one I love, but one of the more interesting ones is called what is your screen gnome? So it's kind of like your genome, but for what happens on screen. And this provides a way for the quality of it. Are you joining this? Are you in school? Are you connecting with family, right? What is it? Are you in-game socializing, right? Or are you just in-game for mood modification? Because I don't want to feel what I'm feeling because I'm 10 years old and life is hard in my little body. So I think those perspectives are very important. There are a lot of very effective tools. I would certainly recommend places like Common Sense Media to be able to get some great tools. They have wonderful guidelines there. The American Pediatric Association also has some as far as screen time guidelines and how they do. There's a lot of smaller things as well, but I think the big one I give for families are the approach of responsibility, right? So as young people develop and grow is they're going to be able to take responsibility for more and more of the power that comes along with digital technology. And I do liken digital technology in many ways to driving a car, right? You have to get educated and to be able to take responsibility for that. There's that test period before you have to drive with another driver, and then you can drive on your own, but not at night, et cetera. And so it's a similar process. And if anybody demonstrates that they're not able to respond, they don't have the ability to respond to, say, failing boundaries around time or quality, then they need external support. And that's where the parent can come back in. So those are the perspectives, all those smaller ones too, like grayscaling and whatnot, which we can get into whenever we like.
Tell us more about that, Jamison. Grayscaling. What is?
Sure.
A lot of us don't know what that is.
Yeah, sure. So screens are remarkable. I like to say that in all of human history, there's only 4 big categories of things that have shown light directly into our eyes: the sun, fire, light bulbs, combustion with all the fire, and now screens. There's also fireflies and these little small categories. But the brightness of this and the way in which it puts light into our eyes is you take a small child and they're just going to look at the screen. And then if you look behind me or behind Dr. Cat or any of us, see these colors, this physical world is just not as rich as the deeply saturated screens are. And so one tool you can use is called grayscaling. It's available on all smart devices. You can use it on all modern phones. And you can use it on computers as well, which actually allows it to go into black and white. Looks like 1930s old-time computer usage. And we actually have in our training, our clinical training, we ask people to do that as they go through because it's a lot less intense on the eyes and a lot less compelling. It's much easier to look away. We don't have that same somatic response to it.
Wow.
And you were
So I
telling
want
me.
to ask you.
Oh, go ahead, Nadir.
I want to ask you something because I think you brought up one point that is really interesting. Your comparison, with driving, and I think one thing that is really challenging from a parent perspective is that typically, if you're a parent and you're trying to teach or help your kid to drive, you know how to drive, right? Most of the time.
Right.
But with technology,
Yeah.
you don't. I think that's one of the big problems is that parents are not able very often to know, how do I help my kids? How do I decide, or how do I limit that, or how do I discuss this with them? We heard before them talking about a variety of, social media. And, even if I consider myself a tech savvy kind of person, for example, I don't know really how TikTok works because I don't use it. I can see a lot of parents have problems with that. And, when it comes to either decided, what app, going back to your concept of Gnome that I love, really decided what is good quality or what is good content. So it's really hard for them to decide. And they don't have very often, I think, that's what I heard from my fellow parents, any good knowledge about how do I find technology that helps me, either limiting or overseeing or getting a better sense of, what my kids are doing, to then being able to understand what is their screen on. So back to the example, I think that we, as parents, we don't have the right knowledge very often to be able to do, to follow and to help and to, basically bring our kids into this journey with us.
Can I add to that, Nadir? Yeah. I was going to say, don't get me started, right? Also, there's a frustration because we want to understand what they're doing. We want to be a part of it. But I can't follow. Like when he shows me a Minecraft game, he comes in, oh, Mom, and I'm just like, oh my God, I'm getting dizzy. I'm getting motion sickness, right? So, and his father, the same thing. When he comes to visit, he's like, I can't follow this game. So there's this huge gap, like you're saying, not only in just like visually us staying the course, but it's almost this overstimulation. And so I watch them like jump from TikTok to all these different apps that they have open. And I know we do it when we're working sometimes, if we're working on Facebook or we're jumping back and forth from Messenger to email to maybe we've got a doc open, an Excel spreadsheet. But I feel like an elephant the way I'm doing it compared to them. They're just hopping back and ping, ping, ping. So that, for me, that's hard because I want to be there and next to him and see what he's doing and see what he's working on. But I don't have that ability. My brain can't work that fast.
Right.
There's got to be some technical term. Help me out.
Well, no, I think that's very much so it's along that line. The car is a good metaphor in the way you put it, Nadir, and then also just that wanting to connect around it. So one is within family systems, technology is often going to be one of those things where the parent is not necessarily the teacher, right? Like how many of us learned to drive from a parent who wasn't necessarily the best teacher for us, right? The one, right, maybe really freaking out, oh, okay, don't do it, right? Because there's that emotional attachment too, as opposed to having somebody else around it too. as a culture here in the US, we're not at the point, I think, of having that formal digital training. Like, I was taught to type when I was a kid, right? Like, that was about the extent of the digital training I had. The rest of it was me being a nerd and learning how to hack people on America Online in 1995, right? And there was
tell us about that too, okay?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a nerd. I grew up on it. I had anxiety and depression as a kid, and I escaped into screens. It's like it was my safe place where I could go and modify my own mood because I was just so socially anxious and I didn't know how to do me, right? And so I was able to find those spaces. And by 1987, my dad had got me a Mac Classic, which I had broken, taken apart, and put back together. And then by the mid 90s, I was on AOL, like early internet, and I was phishing and hacking. I found pornography, right? All this stuff. And my parents had no idea that that was even available, right? Let alone whether or not to monitor me. And
how old were you, Jamison, at that point?
At that point, I was about 13, 14. I'm an elder millennial. I was born in 1981. Elder millennial. So I can go quick on digital technology because I like to say I grew up with the internet rather than on it. And so screens have been a part of my life. I have 3 screens in front of me right now, and I work online, and that's how it goes. And so when it comes to, I think that's one of it, is ultimately, I think we'll get to a point of having, especially around, this is not my specialty, but I'll speak to it for a moment, which is around e-safety, which there's been a lot of work done, right? So as you were mentioning before, with like people popping up into your chat and what is cyberbullying, how to keep young people safe online, there's been a lot of good work on that. Is that there? Where's the train? It's the train o'clock. And so there's been a lot of good work about that, and it's an imperative issue, and that's actually what I suggest parents do first, is really make sure they're on that, because that's some of the boundary stuff that is going to really help keep safe online, and there's a lot of really good tools about that as well. Then next is basically, it is the knowledge gap, and so one is, I'm pretty sure we have to get to the point of just accepting that we're not going to understand it, right? They're always going to be ahead of us, right? Every next gen is going to be better at it than us, and it moves faster than we can keep up. So much like not a lot of people listen to new music after the age of 30, right? We kind of go back to those same songs we liked in our 20s and teens, that breakup song that feels great, right?
Like salt and Cristina.
Right, yeah. And so it's the same thing from a developmental standpoint, is that stuff that we grew up with is what we're going to be familiar with and what we'll be comfortable with. And hence later in life, it's harder to pick those things up. And it's also not where the interest lies in the same way. So rather than, well, one is there's the macro control, right, as a parent, which is there's certain choices that can be made around what devices happen in what spaces at what times, right? So those are the big ones. And like the big questions I have to get is, when should my kid have a smartphone, right? When should things like that? So those are important questions to ask along the way, and it's really based on where the child is and what they're able to take responsibility for. And then next is to really fold it into the conversations you're having, much like if your kid were to go out and run down the street and play with the kids on the next block, right? When they come back, you ask, what'd you do, right? What do you get into? Are you lighting out firecrackers, in the neighbor's yard, or, right? Are you skateboarding? What's going on? And so that's having that be a part of the process is really important as well. And then third, I think I mentioned this to you, Dr. Cap, earlier when we had a chat, is remember, especially around adolescents have a need to take risk, right? Like they need all the kids that were just on there, 10, 11, 12, right? They're just getting to the age where they need to be taking risks. And it's often very helpful to provide those safer spaces, right? Like give them a skateboard, give them a helmet and knee pads, and let them fall down a bunch so that they can have that experience, rather than being 14-year-old Jamison hacking and looking at pornography online. Right? So, and getting into trouble. So, those are some of those. I can go on and on about that, but I've been talking about it.
And one of the important things you said, Jamison, was about making sure that as a parent that you know your security settings and you're taking care of that stuff first. And I know, Nadir, that's something that you did a lot of research on before you gave your kids smartphones. Can you tell us?
Yeah. I can tell you a little bit about my experiences, which, in no way is what everybody should do. That's what we did, but definitely. So first of all, I want to start with, what Jamison said about the discussion, the trying to find some kind of a middle ground. I think that's where we started from the beginning. So there is this, this tension on one side between the invasion of privacy, knowing what your kids are doing, and on the other side, letting them explore and letting be them, especially, with my oldest one, who is 13. She's in the teenage years, and she has a lot of, she wants to be herself, and she wants to have her independency, or to start to have that. So it's really a balance between, the two things. And I think having this discussion about trust is really, really important. So that's where we started with everything. And, maybe I can start with the mobile phone that you said. So we constantly have discussion also right now with my younger one is, when can I have my phone? So it was really kind of a discussion with them to try and understand why do you need it? And when the reasons was actually there, then we said, okay, that's a good time now to start to do it. And then, there are examples online of how do you manage the responsibility. So what we did, we looked online for what are called sometimes contracts or agreements with kids. And, there are a variety of them. Some I find too complex or, they go too much into the details. Other, they're not covering the basis. But I think it's a good thing to do that. So we sat down with our kids and we went through that, and we checked off all the things and said, okay, this is a good agreement, and then we can go on with that. So this is the same we did for social media. So the way we did, we introduced mobile phone first, without social media, and then social media. We did the same thing, the same discussion. What are the requirements, etc. Really looking at the responsibility and making it very clear for your kids that you want them to do it. You want them to go there. If you are okay with that, but there are responsibilities to take. So again, similar to that's what we did. With the apps and back to the idea of the screen home, the quality of what they're getting, I think it gets a little bit more complicated, because it's really hard, to know what they're doing, especially when they disappear. For Amanda, upstairs in this seems like very fancy environment. I would love to be there. I would have loved to be there as a kid as well. But then they're there and you don't know really what they do. And again, there is this balance to do about, how long they stay and what they're looking at. And, I've been exploring a number of different tools. I think Jamison said there are tools online. There are a lot. There are maybe too many sometimes. I don't get lost there.
It seems like too many. Yeah, I get confused when there's so many. I don't know which one to do. And then I'm paralyzed. Exactly. I don't do any of them.
Yes, and a lot of them obviously are for profit, so they want you to pay money to do this and that. So we experimented with a bunch of them. You can find them online. There are companies that are well known that are developing those. Things like Norton, or there is something else just called Custodio, et cetera, et cetera. I don't want to go too much into those names. These are paid ones. But I want to tell you about our experience. So we tried that. I tried them. I paid for several months, and they were not really doing exactly what I wanted. So the tipping point was when we are Apple kind of family. So I also have 3 screens, 3 Apple devices in front of me. It's when Apple came out with iOS 12 2-3 years ago. That's where they introduced in the native operating system of the devices the screen time feature. And although this doesn't actually cover everything, it is, I think, good enough, to do a lot of what parents want to do. Mm-hmm. So what I would recommend to parents is to spend some time on Apple to look at, the screen time, the screen time password. And for Android, I'm not an Android user, but there is something called Google for Families, which I think is very, 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 very similar. And this allows you to do very, very simple things, going back to some of the points that Jamison brought out, content filtering. So we want to make sure that kids don't get content that they shouldn't get. The same way we get rated film, rated movies, you can get your apps content is rated online, and you can use those filters to do that. You can block sites if you want, if you discover that they shouldn't go into these specific sites and for some reason are not rated. And back to some of the discussion that we have that I heard the kids having, you can set these screen time limits, which I think are really important. But again, the way we did it, we went back to have a discussion with our kids and try to understand, okay, how long do you think you need, to do games online? How long do you think you want to watch movies online, YouTube and things like that? And what, at least on Apple, you can do very nicely, so you can decide what hours, what days, make a schedule, pretty much like you set up your meetings on your calendar. You can say, okay, Monday through Friday, you can have screen time between this time and this time. It cannot be more than X amount of hours, and you can even go down and say you can have 1 hour of games, 1 hour of videos, you can have 1 hour social media, whatever it is that you want to tune it, and you can make it so that it changes every day, the weekend, the week, when they're in COVID mode, or when they're in regular school, etc. And I think this worked very well for us, and also gives them they have some kind of a better awareness of what is going on. So they know what their limit is, and they're doing a good job because they're giving them warning online. You have another half an hour, and I think also what I find interesting is that they can ask for more time, and it's very easy for them. They press a button. Sometimes their whatever movie, it still have 5 minutes, and they really want to finish it, obviously. So they can easily ask on my device. I get a notification. I can say yes, approve for 1 minute, approve for 30 minutes, approve for an hour. This seems to work very well for us, and that's something I would recommend for parents who don't want to spend money and they want to have a good control of that, is to just use the native apps, Screen Time on iOS and Google for Families on Android. And these, I think, spending some time on that allows them to have a reasonable, I don't want to say control, but it's more like awareness of what their kids are doing.
Nadir, one of the things that you're saying is native apps, and I just want to point out, because I have a similar experience, where early on we used a paid service, and actually did not turn out to be very good. The kids, as Jamison was saying, they were 7, 8, 9 at the time. They basically hacked their way through the restrictions. The younger kid found a way to get more time because he just learned that if he just logs in under a guest account, he got to have another, more time. And then hacking and changing. So echoing for you guys.
A little.
Yeah, I don't know what that is. Just try. Okay. So that was something that the paid service didn't do very well for us. We didn't keep up very well. And of course we responded with, if you're not showing responsibility with this by hacking, and then it became this not pleasant experience of, now we have to put restrictions. You're grounded from it. We're pulling back. And if anything, I probably pulled back too much, right? And now it's too strict. And so Nadir, the other thing you said that I love is collaboration. Like at this point, let's sit down, collaborate. How many hours do you think is good? And more recently, my kids actually staged a protest. It was kind of funny and cute. They did it in a kind of funny way. But they staged a little protest that basically I had, basically said, we're going to take a 1 week break. Because I was just tired of them doing electronics. I said, okay, we're gonna do a whole week break from electronics. And they, on Monday morning, they sat me down and they had speeches, and they basically were advocating for every 1 hour of chores we do, we get 1 hour of screen time, which is actually less than what I would have given them, So it was interesting when I collaborated or sat down to collaborate that they came up with a better offer than what I would have came up with. And I liked their offer better. So, but actually, sorry to hop around, but just to go back to the native apps, Nadir, we started using Google Families, and so far that seems to be the best. It seems it's not perfect, and we've had to fix a few things because some of the sites that were inappropriate didn't make it through the kind of site blocking. But other than that, we're able to have it automatically shut off their Wi-Fi on their devices, like at 8. So no matter what we're doing, they know at 8 it's going off, and now it's family movie night time or whatever else we're doing.
Yeah, so native apps, just for everybody that is listening in, are basically something you don't have to install on your phone. It's already there, and you go there, and it's basically already set up for the owners of the device. But that's the point. So if you have a shared device, if you're able to log in and log out to a different account, and they have the kids have password, etc. That might basically what you said, it would defeat the purpose. So it doesn't actually work. So the one maybe limitation, big limitation there is that you kind of have to have an account per kid, and you have to have, a device where they can log in with that account. And on Apple, it's just that. So it's, you cannot have multiple accounts, but on Google you can. So you have to make sure that, they're using their accounts, and some of it is responsibility, some of it is maybe just making sure they only have access to one account. Another thing that is, I think it's more of a advantage, but it's kind of a limitation on one side, or let's say you are forced to do it. You need to create these accounts, and I think the best thing to do is to have one account per kid, because again, depending on the age, you might want to do different kind of restriction, or maybe there are automatically rating that can be applied depending on the age. So have shared account for kids, sometimes it's I found it to be problematic, because then you're not able to really tune it to what they need. But yeah, so that the native accounts, as I said, Google and Apple have been, I think, following what's happening on the news before COVID, and they saw the trends, and I think it was Apple first and Google after. They were smart enough to try to push that, and they can always make it better, but I think they did a pretty decent job.
Well, one of the issues that has come up, and I've certainly seen this in clinical practice over the years, way more than I would want, is that I know the kids that were on the show at the beginning have had some pretty okay experiences with random people popping up, other than Axel's dad there. but we've had kids who've come in and they have had absolutely people who have posed as other kids and have tried to elicit meetups. Things like, for example, one of them tried to get the child who was who come in to talk about suicide and attempt suicide. And so there are definitely bad actors or bad characters out there who are online, and for whatever intents and purposes are folks that we want to kind of keep away. Jamison, do you have anything to add to that, or what are your thoughts on what Nadir has said, or to that problem?
Yeah, from a kind of big picture, the approach that I take and I often recommend is one is like the way in which we approach it is we've actually stopped calling this world, the one I'm sitting in, the real world, and this the virtual world. And the reason for that is because there's a bias in there, and there's actually a judgment that says this is real, that's not. Okay? And it's also how we tend to think about it as digital migrants, right? So if we didn't grow up with it, if we're not digital natives, we didn't grow up with it, we've migrated into it. This seems like a foreign alien thing to us.
Jamison, right? I'm glad you said that. Yeah. Oh, sorry. I'm glad you said that, because I think that's what my son is trying to tell me.
Yeah. Right.
Like, yo, mom, like, this is my reality.
This is my reality, right? And so and I've had this conversation over and over with parent clinicians often. I had one when I was even at a talk in Singapore, and she said, I just want my son to appreciate real art. And he just watches these people in Minecraft making stuff, and that's not real art. And I very gently said, what if that is what art looks like as well, right? And so they exist in these digital worlds, and it can very much become problematic. So from the safety standpoint, I think the useful way for us to start thinking about it as, where would you let your kid go in the physical world, right? How do you know, right? If they're going over to a friend's house and there's a parent there, it's like, okay, do I trust that parent, right? Are they going to be a responsible caretaker for my child while they're there? Same as well. Do they need a chaperone to go to the middle school dance, right? Or are they going to be drinking out back, right, by the time they get to high school? What do they need? How long is my kid going to be out of the house online or other place before I start to worry, right? And so translating that to that, and that's where these monitoring tools can be very useful. It's especially useful to bridge when they initially get a device, especially a smart device, up until they have their own internal capacity to respond to violating their own boundaries around comfort and safety, right? Much like with the driving metaphor. So, and they need to be able to learn that. The term I'm using for it is, like, we want a lot for our children. And just as a note, I'm not a parent, so I need to make sure I don't present myself as that, but what I often hear as far as what want for children is like, we want them to have a good education and good opportunity and good prospect. And then the psychologist in me, what I often hear is, I really want my children to be emotionally resilient, right? And that when I hear well-rounded, right, it's like, all right, the ability to have that resilience. And a lot of time in digital spaces can create a lack of that. There's a lot of research that's showing that as well. My joke when I talk to 16-year-olds is, I used to have to ask people out in person, and then when they rejected me, I had to just feel that, right? I didn't have a phone to just look at, right? I couldn't escape myself. I had to just feel that, and then my computer was all the way at home. And so, there's an opportunity lost in that as well. And so I connect that and say, okay, we also want emotional resilience. We also want technical resilience. And the problem is not the technology. The problem is having only the digital spaces to feel safe, comfortable, and resilient inside of. And so I think it was Axel who pointed to it, right? Which is in psychology, we would call it protective factors or replacement activities. Is often the most important thing to do is make sure that they have anchors in the physical world. How are their social skills developing in the physical world? And that can even mean gaming in the same room with somebody, right? That can mean that. Where are they finding meaning and purpose? Right? Where do they really care about things? Is it only in the digital world, or are they going and walking dogs down at the local dog shelter, right? Because they love animals and they find that can be a useful thing. So what are their anchors in the physical world, so that they have a choice between both and they don't only have to be inside these digital spaces to feel safe and resilient and okay with themselves.
So really play. Go ahead, Amanda.
Oh, I was just saying, what I found as a parent is that is the biggest challenge right now, as we all went into lockdown. Leo's been on before. He was on, I think, month 1, he was on the show. And so everyone's kind of growing with them. And Leo was a kid who didn't own a smartphone, who obviously didn't have a PC or virtual reality, and was in ballet class, and also just made the competitive soccer team. And we owned a social club. So he had all, like you're saying, he had those pillars, right, to keep him grounded in this, well, what are we calling it? Reality, virtual, we'll get there.
I call it the physical world.
The physical world. And, we traveled a lot and would hit up museums. And so the concern is how do we measure that when a lot of those anchors have been taken away unexpectedly due to COVID and the pandemic. And if you have people that are he's an only child, right? So now you have to respect families that don't want to, extend their social bubble.
Right.
So.
Yep, exactly. And being able to do that. And a lot of this specific crisis within this is a lot of the kind of lower level, that non-crisis looking issues are issues around, say, physical contact and lack thereof, right? Like not being able to have a hug, right? These things actually are just, especially cumulative, are incredibly powerful. And I put in a trauma category as far as that feeling of isolation and disconnection, which is often what all of us are looking for through digital spaces. And we should all, even as adults here, recognize that I'm sure we all have our own digital things. Who's not binged a bunch of Netflix at some point, right? During quarantine. So it is about that as well. So the biggest, or the place to start is the embodiment part, right? So being in digital spaces is not to be in one's body. So I often give families and individuals very simple tools around how to stay physically, mentally present within one's body while using digital devices. Because that's where we get lost. We actually leave ourselves and can get so immersed within it that we're not physically in our own body. That's painful for us as grown adults. That is very problematic for developing people, right? So people who are growing physically. And so one is it can be a 25-minute timer in which you spend 25 minutes on, and then for 5 minutes you need to run around the house 5 times, right? Like, it's little weird things like that that can be a game, and you can make it fun and have a whole thing, but it is like weird little things like that that are very helpful. And then the next is, it's a pandemic. Everybody gets to let themselves off the hook from trying to make it a perfect thing on digital, right? Like, this is just where we're at. They're going to need to use a lot of screens, and okie dokie. Then it's about it's back to, rather than quantity, right? It's a quality issue, right? So are they connecting with family, right? Are they learning new social skills? I can't give you a hug, and yes, I'm kind of somatic. I'd rather physically connect, but can I practice my verbal skills around being direct about saying, hey, I care about you, right? Like, and working in that. So there's ways to work in that as well. And it can be in game, it can be in these different spaces too. So I think
an example I want to bring that I see my kids doing a lot, and I think I heard some of the kids and the parents saying as well, is when they play Minecraft before, they would just play Minecraft, right? Right now what they do, they play Minecraft, and at the same time they have FaceTime on, and they FaceTime their friends. So they're actually playing Minecraft with their friends, and they're talking. And this kind of, I think, gives them this kind of, social aspects that they didn't need before, and they heavily need right now. In no way I say that this is the same as having obviously a physical contact in a physical world, but it helps. And again, for parents out there, I think I would advise them to try to, if their kids are not doing them by themselves, to see if they can actually pair up with their friends and try to do something like that. They play, and at the same time they socialize, and they kind of have some aspect of this kind of social interaction in there as well.
Nadir, I would call it resilience building from a child psychologist perspective. Is we can't have physical hugs right now with our friends, right? Talking about my kids and their friends, and so kind of teaching them what else can we do instead. What's a good enough approximation given that there's a pandemic and we can't. So instead of focusing on what we can't do because of this big bad pandemic, let's focus on what opportunity does it give us. And so for them, the opportunity it has given them is I'm allowing them to do Zoom, Hangouts, and they are, like Kate yesterday, I caught her in the kitchen and she was washing dishes, and there's her cousin Sophia, on the monitor on Zoom doing her dishes. And that would have never, they're actually spending more time together right now than they would have normally in a non-pandemic world. And so that's sort of again, I talk about this, I think it's in almost every episode, that's sort of the silver lining that she's kind of gathered from this, is she's getting closer to Sophia, albeit, and I like really, Jamison, what you said about, not calling it a virtual world, but it's just a physical world, and then that's the world that they're on the screen, but it's very much sort of almost still a real world. Not almost, it is a real world for them. They are interacting. Yeah, versus that it's not a real world, that just because she's on a screen, doing her own dishes.
Right.
So I really like that.
I think it's a different modality to get access to the real world.
Yeah. And I want to make sure, I know that we have so much to cover, but one of the things I want to make sure we get to is when does this become a problem? Because that's such a big question that parents ask me. When does it, gaming is normal. It's part of, for digital natives, for Gen Alphas, they're born basically, and there's so many benefits to this, and we know this. Some of the studies show us, faster reaction time. Kids who play, I don't know, what are they called, 3D virtual reality games become better pilots later, or have, enhanced skills as pilots, for example. And so some of the downsides, though, is when does it become like an addiction? And Jamison, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot of research being done, and there needs to be quite a bit more. The technology moves faster than we do in research, but here's what we know. We know that right now there's over 2.5 billion active gamers in the world, people who game regularly, 2.5 billion. It is the largest entertainment industry by far, and bigger than films and television combined is gaming. It is a huge, huge industry. And within games, there's a lot of problems, and I always like to name those. So a lot of games follow gambling mechanics and actually build those in. Games are fundamentally digital products that use persuasive psychology to capture attention and get people to spend money. And so that's the entire thrust of it, which doesn't make them bad, it makes them businesses, right? Like that's it. And because of that, there's a lot of problematic characteristics that are baked into them, and they iterate very, very quickly as far as how it engages. Of those 2.5 billion, the best estimate is that the vast majority, over 90%, are just recreational casual gamers, right? It is fun. It is literally just fun and games. But a much smaller percentage of that have those at-risk behaviors or risk factors associated with gaming, and then even smaller problematic. And the estimates are looking at when we get to the disordered level, it's probably just 1%, if not a little bit less, which is still a big number for 2.5 billion.
Yes.
It's still a big number. So the question is, how do I know, right? When is it become a problem? And there are a few ways to know within it. But one of the big ones is it being used for what we call clinically mood modification, right? Are they escaping into a game because they're having trouble being in their body, right? So that's a pretty big one. And then the other is just the simplest of, do I need the game, right, and not have it? So I think all three of them, all the kids before, at least two of them, maybe not Liana, but they said that this physical world was boring, right? The phone ran out on the camping trip, end of the camping trip, right? We can't just sit in nature. That's going to be the worst, right?
He didn't want to talk about that, though. I was calling out his older cousin.
Right. So, and that's a very regular thing. So these are hyper stimulating. The amount of information that is sent just visually, let alone auditory, just visually through the screen is more than we would have gotten in weeks, if not months, just a few years ago, right? So the amount of information is huge and incredibly, incredibly stimulating. And hence, anything that's outside of this little box is going to feel quite boring initially, right? And so there's quite a bit of research that's been done to show that, okay, if they step outside of it, that feeling of boredom goes away. My favorite line for that is, boredom is just a failure of imagination. And so you need boredom. Boredom is a prerequisite for creativity, right?
Yes.
You have to be bored to get the imagination going, to get really creative within spaces. So and that's where we look at the technology dependence. We're all dependent on technology to survive. We have to use technology. It's part of our hierarchy of needs, unless you're going to go live out in the woods. So are you able, though, to just sit in your body alone, right? Are you able to just sit there without your phone? How many people can go to the bathroom without bringing their phone? It's a really good question, right? And the answer is not a lot of us. Not a lot of us do that, right? And that's exactly the problem there, is can we just be alone in our body doing and not being connected? And as long as we have that, whatever time we're spending online, unless it's a safety issue, is often going to be fine. So that can be kind of the bright line for all of us, is can you just be offline and not be craving online?
And I thought, well, for me, what was interesting was them saying how many TikTok videos they see. Right. I mean, I guess our generation, we have experience being on Facebook, like, right? But they're actually taking the time to watch videos, and it's one right after the other. So that was interesting, like you're saying, the amount of information that's just coming at them all the time. And then also I wanted to see what the studies were for their, just, they have this, they're a brand. These kids are now a brand because they have to have that screen representation of themselves. Yep. So, and I'm wondering too, for girls, like, thank God we didn't grow up with Facebook, because.
So the next big, so after gaming, I'm pretty sure what's coming is social media and mental health, specifically around social media, as far as the conversation. The digital citizenship and digital self, especially. Okay. Because one is, we all put on our faces. I definitely considered my beard lines because I knew I was going to be on this today, right? Like, and you saw my little avatar before, he kind of looks like me, and it's curated. There you go, right? See? So we've got the things, like there's a big nail polish rush because we all have to wear masks, right? So nail polish more than lipstick now, I heard. It's much more popular, right? Like there's a whole, and so, not for me, evidently. But, and so when we look at digital self, it is absolutely huge, what we can project and what we can hide and what we can show. And the consideration around that is absolutely huge. On the whole, and this is, I think, my kind of biggest naysayer part around digital is because it's moving so fast, we are ultimately experimenting on our young people.
Yes.
Right? And the optimist in me goes, okay, and that, well, the negative is that kind of sucks, and they'll figure it out, right? Like we made the printing press and we went from 3% literacy to almost 100% literacy, right? Pretty quickly. The way in which our minds work changed and we figured it out, right? The rational enlightenment happened and we're there. We figured it out. We've made it, all technologies are attempts to have more control and power, and all of them come with negative consequences we didn't predict, and we're still here so far for now. And so they're going to be the ones to solve it. To speak to your point specifically on digital self is, it is a major issue. There's everything from body dysmorphia, the comparison. There's never been, especially for young women and girls, the way in which physical and cultural expectations around physicality, and that's projected online, and then comparison, right? 20 years ago, it was just the cover of Vogue that you could be like, well, my body doesn't, what? Right? That's not representative of my body. And now, of those 500 that Liana saw, probably 200 of them were women in bathing suits dancing, right? Like that's what TikTok is. And how that influences the mind is incredibly massive. We don't truly know. And so what I like to suggest is, one is, for parents specifically, is there's a choice around this, right? And making the choice, we have to make choices for young people because they don't have the capacity for it, right? And then offer them the choice as soon as they are. And I think that's true of digital self in general. My niece is 3 years old. She has never been on any social media post ever because her family decided she needs to be an age of consent to be able to have a digital presence, right? She needs to be of age to that. And other families decide, it's better for them to have the social capital of 6,000 followers by the time they're 12, because that's going to give them a leg up in the world, right? I don't know which one's right. I know which one I prefer. I don't know which one's right.
Right.
But the important part is to make the choice, and that's the opportunity. Especially
one thing that I found interesting in this kind of jumping onto new technology, being like your smartphone or your social media, is to give kids some kind of a trial period. So we started with both of them, with my oldest one at the beginning of the summer before the school was started. And then she had the whole summer, to work with us, trying to understand how to use it. What does it mean? And then, we were there with her, and then she's off to school, but now at least she had 3 months in the summer to experiment, to experience, to ask questions, et cetera, et cetera. I think putting in this kind of trial period helped a lot us, versus, deciding, as you're saying, yeah, we can decide, okay, now is the time, but still, let's have some time to ramp up on that. And even if we do not understand it, to be there with them, to try to see if there is any question that comes up or anything that is unclear, and maybe also for understanding it better.
Yep, that's great.
The biggest thing I hear here, very sort of a take-home message for me, is that to be aware of what's going on, to be mindful, to be conscious, about it, to collaborate or discuss with, your children, so that it's a choice that they're doing. And so I think that every parent can probably empathize with me of those times when we just need a break, or we've got a business or work meeting. And so just, whatever, right now I'm on, doing the show for an hour, kids, just be quiet, whatever you can, right? So I might have been tempted to just give them devices, just, and so, but when that happens sometimes, it's more of, we're using it functionally, and we're not being mindful of coming back and checking in on them and what they're doing. It's not so much of a choice, but it's sort of a, a reliance on the devices to kind of entertain them. And so what I'm hearing here from each of you is stop, think about what it is that they're working on. You know, what is it? What's the quality? You know, what it is that they're doing. Are they socializing with friends while they're playing Minecraft? Or are they disappearing and emotionally investing into a world where perhaps they're isolated or alone, and the only other people who are real there are just the people who are in there, and not people that they know in real life. And then the other thing, Jamison, that you mentioned with gaming addiction, that I kind of think of, kind of a cute little funny story with my kids, because of course they're kids of a child psychologist, is towards the end of their time, and I say, okay, you know, 5-minute warning, and inevitably there's always some kid who will say, no, just another, you know, whatever it might be. And I would hear every once in a while one of the other kids going, psst, you know, and they'll mention their name, like, you know, Mom will think you're addicted if you complain, so you gotta make sure that you give it up. I just will have to like laugh at, you know, you know, internally laugh about that, because
it's not a bad voice to have internalized. to be like, well, okay, right.
Yeah,
I think that it's that's the technical resilience, that ability to self-regulate around it, to have a choice rather than just reflexively. And we are all of this, right? The notification goes off, we pick up the phone. We don't think about it. There's not actually a change happening a lot of the time. This is how it is. Our entire thrust, I think, with the clinical training we're doing at Intenta around this, is we really want to have human solutions for digital being, because we have to be digital, right? And we need to be human about it. And going from that mindless, compulsive engagement to having more choice around when and how we engage with it. And it's a lot of work, and we don't have all the solutions yet, but that's the hope.
And I can speak that a lot of child psychologists, or a lot of psychologists out there, don't have. We're getting a lot of people coming in asking about gaming addiction. You know, do we have it? You know, does my child have one? Or do I need to be worried? Or perhaps they do, because they're on it for, you know, 11 hours, you know, yesterday. And so one of the areas of concern that has happened is that we don't have a lot of experience or trainings as psychologists, you know, so you might, or as clinicians, mental health clinicians, not just psychologists, is that we're seeing these kids, and we kind of think of it as, well, it's sort of like maybe alcohol addiction, or, you know, some of the other addictions, but we don't really have any training specifically in gaming disorders to know how to treat it, or even how to assess for it. And so, Jamison, that comes to you. You're a co-founder of Intenta, and I'd like to show the video of Intenta at the end of our show today for folks. And could you just tell us a little bit about what Intenta has developed for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we found is that there were so many people, especially families and young people, that were struggling with gaming, that didn't have resources and places to go for it. I spent the last few years developing clinical programs specifically around that, and a lot of time training mental health professionals about how to work around gaming. And so we've put together a 15-hour training specifically for mental health professionals, so counselors and all the way up and down, and then also for prevention specialists, so for people that bring psychological education into schools, et cetera, to be able to communicate around this. Because what we find is that if you tell even young people about the gambling mechanics, right? So TikTok, that's a slot machine. That's the mechanic that's in there. And they pulled it straight out of the gambling industry. Wow. And so, like, just information like that can also, especially for the rebellious ones that want to fight back against the system, if they can tell they're being manipulated by it, it's helpful. But so we've put together 15-hour training, which is that can lead towards a certificate to actually say, you know, have some training in this with rigorous frameworks for assessment. And we focus this first on gaming specifically because it is such a vital issue, and is the one that where we're seeing the most consequence, the obvious consequence, negative consequence in people's life, and where people are asking for support. Our approach is tech positive, like I've tried to share on this, right? We love it. Gaming's great, right? Gaming's not bad or evil. And it can be very problematic for a lot of people. So our hope is that we can help close the clinical skill gap so that there are more and more professionals out there able to pick up the phone and for those people who need direct counseling around it. And there are a lot of good resources online right now. One of our co-founders, Nadir, founded GameQuitters.com, which is the largest online community of families and gamers who have stopped gaming because of it. So, and that's up there right now. That's great for families and for gamers.
Yeah, when I first learned about your resource, I was so grateful because, again, I know that this is a big area, right? In the last, we've talked about Gen Y, the millennials, the digital natives, and then the Google kids, the Gen Alphas. And so there's a huge need that's coming up on us, if not already. And honestly, mental health professionals kind of know a little bit, but not a lot. And so I'm really grateful, Jamison, to your co-finding along with Cam for this clinical training. And we'll put some of that information out there because I know that there are therapists who are watching here who would be very much interested because I've been hearing that a lot of asking to get trainings in it. Right. And so I just am mindful of the time. I realized that we're coming up on the hour and just wanted to open up for if anybody wanted to say anything as a last words. Amanda? Mm-hmm.
I was just curious, Jamison, when you started providing this, was there a huge uptick because of the pandemic, or was this something that had a steady increase in terms of like the number of people reaching out to you? What does that look like? Or do you think as we go into fall and kids are going to online schooling, like what have you seen and what are you expecting in terms of trends for the fall?
So the initial with the pandemic, so generally speaking, sorry for the time, but generally speaking is once all the kids came home, most families, it seemed, just were like, okay, I give up, right? Just have the screen, it's fine, right? And then it's over there and now trying to come back and say, all right, how do we do this? In the fall, it's going to be a lot of screen time. It's going to be a lot coming up. And there are more and more people available to coach and or do mental health work around this for the more significant cases. Honestly, what I would like to see, and I hope this comes along, maybe something we work on, is actually family support groups around it. Because there's so many people that want to have these conversations that don't need a clinician, right? They just need to be like, okay, how are we coming together? What are best practices, right? Have Nadir be like, well, I've done all this research. Let's just have a chat about it and support each other regularly. So I'm hoping that's a trend for the fall.
I'm glad you said that because I feel if, families and friends got together and all got on the same page, then like you had suggested, Nadir, when it comes to scheduling, like my son and his best friend, if our parents are on the same page, then it's like, okay, yeah, they're going to be gaming for this time. And then maybe if it's still the pandemic and they can't go outside and play sports because a lockdown is coming, right? Another lockdown. Then it's like, well, everyone's on the same page that this is the hour that they're doing virtual reality or, I don't know, Lifesaver or something with physical activity.
Yeah.
I think you really nailed that one. Like it can't just be the family unit. I think because they still want to have that contact with their friends and that's what's keeping them going. We've got to extend that kind of decision making.
The structure they had in school is something that needs to be recreated between families, right? From that can be, right? Like your neighborhood community. You're like, okay, let's just out playing together and it's playtime. So it's that same thing. It just takes a bit more intentionality at this point.
Great. And Nadir, do you have any final words for our show, for our parents out there?
Maybe just to say to not be scared if they don't know about how to deal with the different technology. But to be very careful in the sense that there is a lot of information online. So everything I said, you can find it online. But be wise in what you read because there is a lot of amazing information, as we all know as well. But don't be scared. Go out, research. It doesn't take a lot of time. So if you don't have time, I think I can safely say that if you're an Apple user, start with looking at your Apple, native app, and if you're a Google user, the same. That's a good starting point. But back to the initial point is do your research, don't be scared. There's a lot out there and you can figure it out.
Yeah. And to both of your points, Nadir and Jamison, there is actually on social media, a Facebook group of parents of digital technologies basically sharing these ideas and talking about these things and people posing questions of what do I do with this or who has the best apps out there for whatever it is that they're looking for. So there is sort of this virtual, kind of funny, or non-physical family support group that's already out there. So, yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. Nadir Weibel, professor at UCSD and dad who really seems to have it down with his 3 kids. Jamison Wiggins, thank you so much for joining us, a clinical psychologist and co-founder of Intenta. And we'll play that video, which I thought was really interesting when I viewed it. And so Want to make sure that viewers hang on to watch it. And of course, my lovely co-host stepping in for Alexis, who is still traveling, Amanda Caniglia. Thank you so much for joining us today on Bella V TV. Yeah.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Amanda.
Thanks, y'all.
Bye.
Bye.
There are 2.5 billion gamers in the world. Almost all teenagers play game, and the average gamer has been gaming for 14 years. Up to 10% of those 2.5 billion gamers are at risk of problematic gaming. Gaming has gone from the fun of Pac-Man to the immersive world of modern games that are more stimulating, engaging, and rich than the boring real world. Games are digital products designed using persuasive psychology to make money. And the gaming industry has shown extreme prowess at generating that money. The gaming industry as a whole is now more profitable than both films and television combined. This is why the World Health Organization has included gaming disorder in the International Classification of Disorders. There's a huge gaming problem, but there's also a problem for clinicians and counselors that meet clients.
To address this problem, Intenta has created training for professionals. To bridge the clinical skill gap, join us on the International Gaming Disorder Training.